Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our medical detective hats to decode aphorisms 231 through 244 of Hahnemann's Organon. We're going to look at exactly how historical homeopathic concepts around recurring diseases intersect with the intense, urgent demands of modern tropical disease triage. It's a really fascinating blend of classical philosophy meeting real-world medical safety. Let's get into it.
Here is how we'll break it down today. First, we'll look at the clue of periodicity. Next, we'll dissect the anatomy of an attack, followed by the vital quiet interval. Then, we'll take those concepts and apply them to tropical fever emergencies, and finally, look at how classical medicine meets modern public health.
Section 1. The clue of periodicity, decoding recurring symptoms. So, in clinical practice, a recurring symptom is an absolutely powerful data point, and Hahnemann's Organon brilliantly classifies these patterns for us. We've got intermittent diseases, where the exact same morbid state returns literally like clockwork after a measurable, healthy interval. But then you contrast that with alternating diseases. This is where completely different clinical states succeed each other. Think of severe depression that just magically clears up, only to be immediately replaced with physical joint rheumatism. It's wild.
And what's really interesting here is aphorism 234. It reminds us that this periodicity isn't just about fevers. We're talking about non-febrile conditions too. Things like clock-like facial neuralgia, cyclical migraines, or even intermittent asthma. So what's the takeaway? Any regular cycle is a massive clue. It demands deep investigation into the biological triggers. We can't just stare at the rhythm. We really have to dig for that underlying neurological, endocrine, or autoimmune cause.
Section 2. Anatomy of an attack. The triphasic paroxysm.
Let's look at aphorism 235, which says, a classic paroxysm, or attack, puts the human body through three incredibly turbulent steps. First up is the chill stage. We're talking violent, shivering rigors hitting at an exact time. I mean, imagine 19th century doctors practically acting like human stopwatches to track this. Then comes the heat stage, with its burning intensity, sometimes even delirium. And finally, it breaks into an exhausting, drenching sweat. Now, while this is your classic 1-2-3 sequence, the text does note these stages can sometimes overlap, alternate, or just completely skip a beat. To really visualize how this plays out, let's look at tertian periodicity. This is a rhythm that's absolutely classic for certain types of malaria like Plasmodium vivax. So, day 1, right at 1 p.m., an intense 3-stage paroxysm violently strikes. Then, day 2 offers a full day of apparent, total health. But then, like absolute clockwork, on day 3 at 1 p.m., that exact identical attack returns.
Understanding that turbulent attack is definitely crucial. But to truly solve this medical mystery, we have to ask ourselves, what actually happens to the patient's body when that intense fever finally breaks? Well, that brings us to a massively important concept from the Organon, the apyrexial interval. Literally, this is the fever-free time window between those successive attacks. Hahnemann considered this the absolute most critical window for investigating the patient's underlying pathology. It is far more revealing than the fever itself.
Section 3. The vital quiet interval.
Here's why this matters so much. During a peak fever, symptoms are pretty generic to the pathogen, right? Everyone shivering with a 104-degree temperature looks kind of similar because their system is completely overwhelmed. But that quiet apyrexial interval, that is your diagnostic goldmine. It reveals subtle, individualizing clues, things like thirst, appetite, sleep patterns, and residual organ pain. These clues expose the patient's true baseline health. It tells you exactly who the patient is when the disease isn't, shouting at you.
Because the vital force is at its calmest during this quiet interval, historical doctrine dictates some really strict timing rules for dosing. The rule is super simple. Administer remedies immediately after the attack ends and the sweating subsides. The text actually strictly warns to never superimpose medicine during those violently turbulent chill or heat stages. Doing that can provoke severe medicinal aggravations. And what if the next attack is diminished? Well, you wait and reassess rather than blindly repeating the dose.
Section 4. Tropical fever emergencies, real-world triage.
Okay, let's bring this into the modern world. Say a patient returns from a forested region in Sabah, and they're shivering violently every 48 hours. We absolutely must cross-reference those classical cycles with modern lab workups. A tertian fever cycle? That requires immediate blood films for malaria. What about a biphasic saddleback fever with a rash? That demands dengue antigen testing right away. Or a high spiking fever with red eyes after water exposure? That points straight to leptospirosis serology.
Classical pattern recognition tells us exactly which life-saving modern diagnostics we need to run.
And along with those lab tests, we have to be hyper-vigilant for specific red flags. We're looking out for central nervous system signs, like altered consciousness or seizures, cardiovascular signs, like hypotension, spontaneous bleeding, like petechia, or severe respiratory distress. The source material is explicitly clear on this. Any of these red flags mandate immediate emergency hospital escalation. They strongly prohibit unmonitored outpatient management.
Section 5. Classical meets modern medicine. Epidemics and ethics. Looking at aphorisms 239 through 244, the classical texts discuss something called the genus epidemicus. This is essentially a historical concept of mapping a collective symptom totality by observing several cases within an epidemic. The ultimate goal here is to identify a common, matching remedy that represents the prevailing epidemic genius of that specific outbreak. However, we really have to ground this in the real world today. The source materials clearly establish that while the genus epidemicus is a recognized complementary strategy, it absolutely never replaces evidence-based infectious disease protocols. You simply cannot bypass statutory public health laws just because you mapped a homeopathic symptom picture. And this elegantly builds to our ultimate synthesis for this explainer. Classical pattern recognition, mapping those cyclical clues, deeply investigating the apyrexial interval states, and identifying symptom totality, it must always work hand in hand with modern statutory actions. That means notifying public health authorities like the Ministry of Health Malaysia, securing laboratory pathogen testing, and utilizing emergency isolation when necessary.
To summarize our whole investigation today, a recurring symptom is just the very first clue in a comprehensive evidence-based medical safety plan. Periodicity tells us to look closer. We have to map the cycle. We have to examine that vital quiet interval. We must investigate the biological cause with modern tools, and absolutely escalate without delay when danger signs appear.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If the precise rhythm of an illness and its quiet intervals hold so much diagnostic power as we've seen today, what hidden rhythmic patterns are we entirely missing in the complex, supposedly unpredictable diseases we battle right now? Thank you so much for learning with me today. Keep asking questions and keep looking for the rhythms.